After looking at all these cards, I am terrified. The Throne of the Tides mini set has been fully revealed, but there is something that you do not realize. Starting off with Spirit of the Tides, it is a 2-mana 2/2 druid minion that has a pretty lackluster effect. It is an ongoing effect. The more turns that you end with any unspent mana, this will continue to grow, but let's be real here. This card is absolutely garbage. Moonbeam, a 1-mana druid spell that deals 1 damage to an enemy twice. This is a very scary card to have printed. If spell damage is ever good enough for druid to actually play it, this card will be absolutely disgusting, and you can run 2 of them in your deck. From now on, when they release spell damage cards, you have to keep in mind how powerful Moonbeam can be, because this is the type of card that can just win games on its own. Herald of Nature is actually a pretty decent minion. One of the reasons why Beast Druid does not do nearly as well is because they lost Arbor Up. This card is almost like Arbor Up, so if there's ever going to be a wide token style druid deck, this card will probably see play. Next, we move on to Paladin. We have Myrmidon. Now, if this card was printed with the Libram package, it would be absolutely insane, but quite often this card's just not going to be good enough, so why would we even run it? I'm not sure. We have Frontlines, a 9-mana paladin spell that I think is pretty memey. The concept of this card is insanely cool. Slow decks don't really work now in Hearthstone, so this card's probably not going to see play. Now, Light Ray is a very powerful effect. This card could probably come down pretty early on. It reminds me a ton of Corridor Creeper, and that card was pretty great, even though it was just stats. If you can get this card discounted quite a bit, it can be an absolute ginormous swing turn. Next, we have Priest with one of the coolest cards I think we've seen so far, with Disarming Elemental. Drudging for your opponent is one of the cards I actually wanted in this mini set. Unless you're going against an extremely fast deck, this card is a 4-mana 4/4. Basically ruin your opponent's next draw and potentially just make a card almost unplayable. The only way this really backfires on you is that if your opponent plays a lot of high costed cards and you're just making that card cheaper. But in general, picking your opponent's next draw and probably making it a lot weaker is really powerful. Herald of Light, I do think is a pretty interesting effect, but I don't know if this card's actually going to see play because it's just healing on a stick, and I don't think healing on a stick is good enough. I was almost going to say Drown is a brand new card, but we have seen Drown before with Entomb. A little bit different because you are putting that minion on the bottom of your deck so you can actually drudge it and get a good minion. Entomb was played in Control Priest. I think Drown is a pretty great effect. It basically just says no to any minion that you played, and that seems pretty good. Moving on to Rogue, we have Shatter Shambler, which is a very interesting card to add to a Death Rattle Rogue. Now, here's the thing. Death Rattle Rogue is generally pretty bad. The idea of putting a bunch of Death Rattle minions in your deck has not really worked out for the Rogue class. This card, though, is pretty great. If you're putting a card in your deck specifically for the Death Rattle, this card is awesome. And there's so many synergistic cards with this already that I actually do think that Shatter Shambler could make a very interesting archetype. I think you're going to play this card, that card with like Nerubian Egg or something. Next, we have Jackpot. Obviously, this goes into Thief Rogue. Will it see play? Probably not. But if you're feeling a little bit memey, this card is probably pretty awesome. We have Inkville Ambusher, a 2-mana 1/2 stealth and has +3 attack and immune while attacking, and it is a Naga. I'm gonna be honest, this card is pretty spooky. It is a 2-mana 4/2 with immune that has stealth, so it's almost guaranteed to trade up at least once. Best case scenario, in a tempo matchup, this trades 2 for 1. Even though it goes back to 1 attack, if they don't kill it, that means the next turn you can attack again. This card's like a good thing they banned it from Arena. I think this card would just win games on its own. Moving on to Shaman, we have a couple of Murloc boys here. Tylos Burrower, which is a very powerful effect with just drudging in a Murloc deck. I think Clownfish is the real star here because this card in theory is actually free because you get 4 mana in discount to Murlocs. That seems really good. I mean, Murlocs have not really been Shaman's strong suit at the moment, but at any point Murlocs are printed over the next 2 years, this card can be just absolutely insane. You play this becomes a 2-mana 4/4 and you get another. This is so good. Also, why are his eyes red? Then we have Command of Neptulon, which is a very good effect. I don't know why they printed this. This card reminds me a ton of Faceless Corruptor. It is virtually 6 mana because of the overload, but you don't have to have a minion on the board for you to actually transform into to get more value. This card is just straight up good. Warlock looks really interesting this mini set. Herald of Shadows is already a pretty decent card. I don't expect it to see a ton of play. We'll start with Commander Ulfoc, or Ulfoc, am I right? As a 5-mana 7/7, your opponent's cards cost health instead of mana next turn. This is one of the reasons why I absolutely love Warlock, but the issue with this card is that it's probably never going to be played. This card in very niche circumstances is probably extremely powerful. You put your opponent in a very awkward spot that for each card they spend, they are potentially hurting themselves even more. That can set up a lethal for you. Sometimes you're just going to hold this card in your hand for the entire game and never be able to play say it, I think almost every single time you're going to put this into your deck, it's probably just not going to be a good card, and there's going to be a better way of replacing it. I don't think this card ever sees play. I don't think it ever sees play, but it has the chance to be very, very good in the very specific circumstances that you need it, almost like a tech card. Let's move on to Immolate. Now, this is the card that I am probably the most worried for when it comes to Hearthstone in general. This card has the potential to make me quit Hearthstone. This is a very polarizing effect. It's absolutely garbage against any deck that actually can play their cards from their hand. But this card is very good against slower decks. If you're playing Control Warrior and I Immolate your hand, dear God, you're probably upset. You're playing a deck that requires you to play anything for 7 mana or above, you're probably going to be pretty upset. This is the kind of effect that just basically says control doesn't exist anymore. If control is ever good, this card is just like, it just wins the game for you on the spot. Cards, in my opinion, when you design a card, you should not make it so it's like insane and then absolutely useless. You want it to be a little bit more near the middle. It reminds me a ton of Glide. Glide didn't see a ton of play, but when it did, it was extremely frustrating. This is an effect that I think could just make people not want to play Hearthstone. Going to Warrior, I do think that they're getting a ton of mediocre cards. We have the Lava Gorger, which I think is the best card that Warrior received. It could just be taunt, get a ton of armor, and that's probably good enough. Tidal Revenant is a very interesting card because I'm not sure what deck you want to put this in. I don't know what this card is. I don't know why they made it. In Arena, this card's probably insane. Clash of the Colossals is also an interesting effect. On average, how good is a random Colossal minion? Maybe in some kind of really slow Warrior deck, this will be pretty great, but 3 mana to add a random Colossal to your hand, I don't know, man. For Demon Hunter, we have Topple the Idol, which is an AoE for Demon Hunter, which is already super weird, but I do think the card is really awesome. It sets up a bigger control archetype that we have not really seen from Demon Hunter, even though they did print a bunch of cards to support it. I just don't know if this card's better than Chaos Nova, but maybe it ends up actually just being pretty good. Fossil Fanatic is super good for Demon Hunter. You just need extra card draw. It also is just kind of a must kill minion because if you're getting multiple draws off this, it's absolutely insane. Herald of Chaos is also a pretty interesting card to fit into that Fel deck. I just don't know if this kind of effect is good enough for Demon Hunter. It's not like it really needs a 3 mana 3/4 with Rush, but the lifesteal might actually make it good enough. For Hunter, we got Ancient Krakenbane. This card seems pretty good. I am honestly pretty scared because this is an effect that just fits very nicely into almost every single aggressive Hunter deck. This effect might be a little bit too slow for a super aggressive deck. Shell Shot is a very interesting card, and I think it's definitely one of the more unique things that we've seen. It makes a lot more sense that they nerfed Dragonbane in the most recent patch because this is a card that fits very nicely into Quest Hunter if you want to get your Quest Hunter reward finished. And if this card ends up actually being good, I'm probably uninstalling Hearthstone. If this card counts as an individual spell every single time it does damage, it's disgusting. Like it's so good in Quest Hunter, and it makes total sense why they nerfed the other card, Dragon Shot or whatever the hell it's called. If that's how it works in Quest Hunter, I'm not happy with this. Then we have Canine Otron, which is a very good card to fit into almost any aggressive style deck. If you actually do get a 1-cost minion from the Dredge, that's absolutely insane. It's very comparable to just Patches. This card in a vacuum seems very powerful. Finishing off with the classes with Mage, we get Submerged Space Rock, which is a very interesting card, which I'm not really sure how to use properly because you kind of need to put this on board and hope your opponent doesn't answer it, and you also have to have enough mana to actually use the arcane mage spells. It just feels like it's very, very slow. Polymorph Jellyfish, which is a really cool effect. Not only can you deal with a very big minion, but it can also set you up for a very interesting combo with the spell damage. Not really sure what that deck would look like right now, but this is a card that could be potentially very scary. Last but definitely not least, we have Lady Najar, which is a very cool card because it changes based on the last spell school that you've cast. Fire, you get a battle cry that reduces the cost of your spells in your hand by 1. For Frost, you get a battle cry to gain 8 armor. And for Arcane, you deal 5 damage to an enemy minion and 2 to the adjacent minions. I do think the Frost one is decent, but I also just don't think the effects are necessarily that strong for what this card is. It's not a bad card, but I don't think it's going to make any brand new mage archetype. It just fits really nicely into the Naga mage already. Moving on to neutrals. Now, most of the neutral cards here are almost unplayable. Bubbler, even though it is a really cool effect is just not going to be good enough. Snapdragon with a critical mass of battle cries that are playable, this card can potentially be very good, but I think this card is just not going to be good enough. Coilfang Constrictor, I do think is pretty cool. It has a very unique effect that could just win you a game. It's almost like a tech card. We'll have to wait and see if this effect is actually good enough to be ran. 10 mana 7/7 Colossal +2 Rush Wind Fury. Whenever Neptulon attacks, if you control any hands, they attack instead. What? Out of context, what does that even mean? Okay. 4 mana 4/2 immune while attacking. So you do 8 damage every single time. Imagine putting this in your deck instead of something that actually does something. Sounds strong. It deals 24 damage if it sticks on board. You could say that. So you could say the same thing about a Nixia, right? Like if a Nixia just stays on board, this card's insane. It comes down to how often is this better than Raid Boss and Nixia, right? I mean, close to as good as a Nixia. I think I don't think this card's nearly like that bad. You guys are making this seems like it's just unplayable. Ozumat, 8 mana 6/6 Colossal +6 Death Battle. For each of Ozumat's tentacles, destroy a random enemy minion. What do the tentacles look like? That's a lot of stats for 8 mana though, man. You just use Brawl instead. Can't see this card outside Warrior.